It's been 1 year since Hamas fighters stormed Israel and rained terror on its civilians, carrying out the deadliest attack against Jews since the Holocaust. The conflict has since widened, and today Israel is at war on multiple fronts. In Israel and around the world, vigils and commemorations are honoring the victims of October 7th. 1,200 people were killed. More than 250 were taken hostage. 100 of them are believed to remain in Gaza today. A Gaza that is now largely in ruins. The health ministry there reporting nearly 42,000 have been killed in Israel's campaign to destroy Hamas. Gaza is in a state of humanitarian disaster, and the fighting has since spread. Israel is now battling Hezbollah in Lebanon, seeking to stop the relentless rockets attacks on northern Israel. But heavy bombing has killed another 1,400 people in Lebanon, according to authorities there. And any day, any moment, Israel is expected to retaliate against Iran for its missile attack on Israel last week. It is a war that may widen, that is seemingly without end, with the Middle East on the brink of a much bigger, more destructive conflict. Israel's ambassador to Canada will join us in just a few moments, but first let's bring in Margaret Evans, our senior international correspondent for CBC News. Margaret is in Beirut. So Margaret, this has been a very divisive conflict worldwide. How do different segments of Israeli society view it?
Well, as you were saying, David, that it's evolved into a war on many fronts, and I think you have to break it down a little bit. If you're looking at the war in Gaza, it's very difficult for Israelis to see that as separate in terms of outcome and goal than in relation to the release of hostages. And Israeli society is divided about that. You see those weekly demonstrations of people, the families of hostages, who really are begging their government, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, to find a way to pursue a ceasefire, a meaningful ceasefire that would see their loved ones released. Not everybody agrees with that, especially not the Prime Minister's coalition partners, who are hardline ultranationalists who, have threatened basically to walk away from the coalition if he were to negotiate a ceasefire with Hamas. Then, as you mentioned, we have the war between Israel and Hezbollah. This is something where a majority of Israelis are going to be very supportive of that war, this conflict. They see it as the only way to get some 60,000, 70,000 people, Israelis who are living in northern Israel along the border with Lebanon, to get them back to their homes. They've been displaced for more than a year. Israel has actually made that officially one of its war aims. And it was after that you started to see these moves of troops up closer to the northern border, and then eventually the airstrikes. So, the Israelis say that Hezbollah has fired over the past year 9,000 missiles into Israel. A majority of Israelis are going to say that this conflict, this potentially ground invasion moving a little bit into southern Lebanon, is the only way to bring security to that part of Israel. Again, in terms of both of those conflicts, Gaza and Hezbollah, I think you would see agreement with people that it is necessary amongst Israelis to see the government restore Israeli deterrence that really was damaged on October 7th by that devastating Hamas attack.
There were more attacks today, Margaret. Israel, Hamas, and Hezbollah all launching attacks in some form. What is the latest on the war front in Lebanon, where you are now?
Well, we have heard another really giant explosion tonight, one of those ones that feels like they're using the really heavy bombs, the bunker busters. That's in the southern suburbs, which is behind me, we can actually have a pretty good view, and we certainly hear it, as does the entire city, when those attacks take place. They are increasingly close to the airport, which of course is alarming for people. That airport is still in operation, although not many airlines are flying in or out. Today we saw actually from both sides Hezbollah firing 135 missiles or projectiles into Israel, some of them directed at Haifa. From the Israeli side, the Israeli Defense Forces say they launched 122 airstrikes in southern Lebanon by warplanes in less than an hour. We're also continuing to see these warnings by the Israelis to villages in southern Lebanon to move north, not just to the Litani River, which has been sort of a demarcation line of sorts in the past, but even further north. And also we're hearing today the Israelis warning people along the stretch of coast, sort of from Sidon, which is a coastal city south of Beirut, all the way down to the Israeli border, not to go in the water, not to be on the beach, because they've said that they're going to be bringing the Navy in to participate in the operations that it's undertaking in southern Lebanon. Israel continues to insist that it is targeting Hezbollah targets, projectile weapons depots, infrastructure. The people who are still there, and a lot of people, of course, have moved out. There have been 1 million people displaced in Lebanon. They say it's the civilians that are suffering, as always, in these wars.
Margaret, thank you so much as always. That's the CBC's Margaret Evans live in Beirut. Well, today, Canada's defense minister weighed in on Israel's potential retaliation against Iran. Bill Blair says it would be appropriate for Israel to strike Iran's oil facilities.
The unprovoked attack coming from Iran, almost 200 missiles that were fired at them. I think that demonstrates that Israel has every right to defend itself and to take the actions that are necessary to diminish Iran's capacity to continue to attack.
But as the world awaits that retaliation on Iran, the war in Gaza, sparked by that Hamas attack, continues. And with a wider multi-front war between Israel and Hamas's allies, Hezbollah and Iran, unfolding in the region, does Israel yet see any potential end to the war in Gaza? Iddo Moed is Israel's ambassador to Canada. He's here with me today. Ambassador, thank you for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
It's been just shy of a year since our first conversation in the wake of what happened to your country on October 7th. I wonder what your thoughts are on a day like this, a year later. We're still in this conflict.
David, you know that I've been wearing a red tie, this orange tie, for a very long time, and this is the reason. This is the Bibas family, Shiri, and Kfir and Ariel Bibas and their father, who are being held hostage in Gaza. 101 hostages are still being held there. So you ask me where my thoughts are. Every morning when I put on this tie, and every evening when I take it off, I'm thinking of these red-headed kids. And I'm thinking about our hostages and about the fact that Israel has been forced to fight a war, an existential war, against a lethal mechanism that was put in place by Iran. And so when we are talking today, a year on from October the 7th, 2023, we know that Iran is still using all its proxies to try and annihilate the state of Israel. We want these people back. If Hamas lay down their weapons and bring back our people home, I think that very much the situation will change to a completely new reality. But we don't see that happening, and we don't see Hezbollah laying down the weapons, and we don't see Iran laying down the weapons. So unfortunately, this will last for a while.
9-month-old and 4 years old,
yes.
Those two boys when they were taken. And no, we don't know their condition. You don't know their condition, right? No. So we assume, hope for the best, but who knows, given this circumstance, right. Correct? Let's talk a little bit about this. Like you talked about Hamas laying down its weapons as a way for this to maybe end. Your prime minister has set sort of two goals in Gaza: to eradicate Hamas and to free the hostages. Can you do both? Do you not have to choose between one? Because if Hamas and their leadership has the hostages, can you take them all out and get the hostages back?
It's a choice that the entire world has to help to make, because what we need is for the Gaza Strip to demilitarize and to de-radicalize. And for that to happen, We have to have a very strong coalition against Iran. Iran is behind this. And so if we are speaking about the future of Gaza, we know that the people who live there, those people who need to move from place to place so that we can attack the terrorists and not harm any civilians, those people deserve a much better future. But that future is not in Israel's hands. We want their future to be in their own hands. This is why we left the Gaza Strip in 2005. We wanted the people in Gaza to determine their own future by themselves. And so when Hamas came in and was elected into power and abused all the international funds and money to build the tunnel infrastructure and attack Israel, vowing from the river to the sea, we found ourselves in defending our people and defending our civilians, waging a war that on the face of it has no end. But this is not just Israel's war. Again, this is a war where our neighbors understand that they have to be part of, and also the international community.
But how do you achieve the two goals of eradicating Hamas and getting the hostages released? Because, you know, when you're negotiating with Hamas to release the hostages, they're going to want security and safety in return. Because Yahya Sinwar seems content to let the civilian population be destroyed so Hamas can survive in some form. How do you completely eradicate the people who are holding your civilians that you want back and achieve both goals?
So Israel is not negotiating, not with Sinwar, not with anyone from Hamas. We have the support of Egypt, and Qatar is involved as well, because Qatar has been financing Hamas for many, many years. And they bear responsibility as well for what is going on and for the situation. We have to find a way to get them out. There is no equation here. We are not, the government stated very clearly, we are not going to allow Hamas to be there. Canadian government, Canadian Prime Minister said it also very clearly, Hamas cannot be part of the future. So there is international agreement on that. How do we achieve that? For the moment, we only see a military means to do that. And so we're trying to work as meticulously as possible to try and keep civilians out of harm's way, providing humanitarian aid. We spoke about that numerous times. May I just remind you, several months ago, I think you also reported that Gaza is on the verge of famine and all kinds of horrible things and diseases and all of that. None of that is happening because Israel is committed to living up to its obligations. And the international community, international organizations are using the assistance Israel provides and facilitates the aid for the Palestinians. So it's not an optimal situation. It's far from it. But that is something for the Palestinians to change.
Well, look, there were polio outbreaks. There have been other outbreaks inside the area. There had to be an emergency polio vaccination program, and the aid groups have reported malnutrition in the population. So, I mean, it is...
One polio case.
Okay, but it is an awful situation there by any standard. And I just wonder, a year later, like what is the military standard for having eliminated Hamas? Because by any sort of objective military assessment, they've been completely degraded in terms of their capacity. I know there's still some fighting happening, but you've taken out a large number of the leadership and the soldiers. Is it getting Yahya Sinwar? What is the standard when we know that Hamas has been eradicated?
So that's a very good question, and I won't give you a tactical military definition, but I want all of us to think about the following. The past year, 20,000 rockets were fired into Israel. 20,000. 10,000 from the Gaza, about 9,000 from the north, from Hezbollah, and the rest either from Yemen or from Iran, of course. That is just unfathomable. Imagine this is happening in Canada, and Israel is only smaller than Vancouver Island. I mean, this is unimaginable. So how do we know when we succeed? Well, listen, if we don't hear any more bombs falling, maybe that's a good indication. But we know that they are armed to the teeth. We know that Iran constructed a mechanism through its proxies, which is extremely dangerous and lethal for Israel. And that is why we have to continue this war. We have to make sure that there are no more military threats. And when we achieve that, we will see no more rockets flying into Israel.
There are other fractures in your country over this, right? There are people who want you to keep going until Hamas is completely eradicated. And then there are some of the families of the hostages who were at Prime Minister Netanyahu's house today. They want a ceasefire. They want you to find some way to have an agreement that will allow their loved ones to come home. How do you explain the need to keep going to the family members who just want their people back?
Everybody understands we'll have to keep fighting. The question that is debated in Israel, the horrible dilemma that Israel is facing, what comes first? And this is a horrible dilemma. And the Prime Minister is working to do his utmost to make sure that these people come back home and that the rest of us stay safe. It's a horrible dilemma, but we are faced with a monster, and we have to understand that they don't speak the same terms in the same language that we do. This guy is hiding in a tunnel, keeps shooting wherever he can. When your reporter was talking about Lebanon, behind there was a very peaceful scene. And why is that? Because also the people in Beirut know that if we shoot, we use intelligence to precisely hit those terrorists that we know are there, as opposed to those terrorists that shoot at random into Israeli cities.
There are people, though, family members of the hostages, who do blame Benjamin Netanyahu for changing, putting new demands on the table this summer as a hostage ceasefire negotiation was happening, through intermediaries, through other countries. I mean, what do you say to them who believe that the domestic political interests of the Prime Minister and his coalition government are playing too much of a role in the conversation of getting people out?
It's a democracy, so everybody has a right to their opinion, and if this is what they're convinced of, they stand out on the street in front of his house and they demonstrate. Israeli democracy, and this is why we are so strong. This is why people sometimes misunderstand Israel's internal discussions and see that as a source of a weakness that's around us. Iran, Hezbollah, thought that if there was this internal discussion, even strife around the judicial reforms, that was a sign of weakness for Israel. Apparently it's not. The same soldiers, pilots, whoever was demonstrating at the time are now the ones that are fighting for it, giving up their lives for Israel. So we are very strong. There is debate in Israel, very strong, very vocal, all within the constraints of the law. And this is what it is. And if we want to look forward, where Israel will be after this whole horrible war will subside, it will be perhaps a situation when other leaders will emerge and maybe another form of government will emerge. I don't know. I mean, we will be a strong democracy, but maybe others will have the majority and will be the ones that make the decisions for Israel.
Tens of thousands are dead inside Gaza. The Hamas-run health ministry puts it 42,000. I know there's a disagreement between your government and the health ministry in terms of the precise numbers, but the orders of magnitude are not that far off. It's tens of thousands of dead people. You talk about when this is over, when this eventually ends. And you've talked about in our past conversations how the Palestinian people are not your enemy, it's Hamas. Do you think the Palestinian people will feel you are not their enemy when this is over, when you look at the catastrophic civilian casualties in there and the destruction of so much of the buildings and the infrastructure? And I know Hamas has, embedded itself in civilian populations to make it difficult, to provide a difficult moral calculus to strike it, but it's been happening. How do you see this ending in a way that Israel and Palestinians can live together?
People in Gaza, I don't count on them, being fans of Israel in any point in the future. But they will keep in mind a few things. One is that the overriding majority of those who were hit this time were either Hamas members or their direct families. They will also know that Israel has used a fraction of its force to try and eliminate Hamas. It's a very small strip of land, and Israel could have invaded it very quickly and destroyed all of it. They will remember the constraint and the restraint that Israel has demonstrated when attacking Hamas and taking more than a year, and still 101 are being kept there. They'll keep that in mind. And so there is a basis for us to move forward. I assume at some point in time, they will also look into Israel. And you'll see that 20% of our population is not Jewish and is not considering themselves as Zionists, but they do see themselves as part and parcel of Israeli society, fighting along the Jewish citizens in Israel against Hamas. They will appreciate it as well. They'll see that Israel is a vibrant democracy. And I think that they would like to find a way to have for themselves a kind of rule that will allow them, as Palestinians, to have full expression and full way to express their national aspirations without being shot in the knees if they are disagreeing with the government or without disappearing in some prison because of some other dispute.
Right, but I mean, we're talking 10 to 15,000 kids who have died, right? And you may say that it was you're targeting, and it was, you know, Hamas and immediate family members, but it's obviously not just that. It can't be when half the buildings are gone and the numbers are this high. How on the other side of this, is there a foundation for any kind of a coexistence, Ambassador, that doesn't just flare up into this in another cycle of violence?
Leadership. If we would see on the Palestinian side leadership that is pushing, it could be grassroots, but would be pushing the community to respect Israel's existence as a state, to accept Israel as a state and not call for from the river to the sea, then there is a solution. We are looking for that in Israel. Our point of departure has always been that we want to have peace, and we will do whatever it takes. And this government has been trying to do whatever it takes also to get Hamas supporters away from Hamas until October the 6th, with providing all kinds of incentives, work permits, trade, the inflow of raw materials and all of that to develop industry and all of that. And so there is a source for Palestinians to see a ray of light, but it has to come from within Palestinian society, a strong leadership that believes in coexistence with Israel.
Just a final question. This past year, there are expressions of support for Israel today, its right to defend itself, and of course its right to exist. But over the course of the past year, there has been a lot of criticism of the way your government has conducted its response to the October 7th attacks. Where do you think Israel is in terms of diplomatic support globally a year into this conflict? Do you think it's in a stronger position, a weaker position? Because the criticism is intense at places like the UN, and even allies like the United States are leaning on Prime Minister Netanyahu to change the course of how he's conducting the war. What are your thoughts on where it is?
I would divide a very clear understanding among the international community that Israel has a right to defend itself, and the tactical and let's say domestic considerations that countries make when it comes to their internal audiences. There, the support for Israel may still exist, but then there would be a but. And so I do believe that Israel enjoys the overall majority of the countries of the international community's support. There are a lot of ideas and a lot of misunderstandings, sometimes good ideas, sometimes misunderstanding about what the future should bring to us. We all understand that. Israel understands that we live in an area that has an impact on many other parts far away. And so we take all of that into consideration. But I'm sure that we will prevail, and when we will prevail, the international community will come and support that wholeheartedly.
Iddo Moed, Israel's ambassador to Canada, I want to thank you again for your time on a day like this, and I hope at some point we'll be able to have a conversation about those two little boys coming home. Thank you, sir. I hope so.
Thank you for having me.
Well, here at home, Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs marked the anniversary of Hamas's attack on Israel.
Today, we commemorate 1 year since Hamas' horrific terrorist attacks against Israel. 1 year since innocent people were murdered in what constitutes the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. We remember those who were murdered, all those who were injured, victims of sexual and gender-based violence, as well as those who were taken hostage. Among the innocent people killed on by Hamas, Canada mourns victims of our own. Judy Weinstein, Vivian Silver, Ben Mizrachi, Netta Epstein, Shir Georgi, Alexandre Luc, Adi Vital Kaplun, and Tiferet Lapido. I've been in touch with their loved ones over the last year, maybe here in Canada, also in Israel, particularly following the terrorist attack on the days after when I was there. It's been a year and innocent people are still being held hostage by Hamas. Canada will not stop calling for the immediate release of all hostages. This includes returning the bodies of those brutally killed while they were in captivity. We must all stand up to the rising tide of anti-Semitism and hate we see in our country that has only worsened since October 7th. We continue to condemn Hamas, a listed terrorist organization backed by Iran. Far too many innocent civilians, including women and children, have been killed in this conflict, and we continue to work tirelessly to bring back peace and security in the Middle East, particularly through a two-state solution where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace and security.
Relentless fighting and Israeli airstrikes continue in Gaza 1 year after Hamas attacked Israel, and Israel then declared it would end Hamas. 26 Palestinians were killed yesterday in an Israeli strike on a mosque and school, according to the Hamas-run health authorities. And Palestinians facing further displacement say they fear nowhere is safe. Satellite images here show the scale of destruction of Rafah before and after October 7th. The dust and rubble on the right of your screen show the consequences of 1 year of war. Over that year, the Hamas-run health authorities say nearly 42,000 Palestinians have been killed. And as the conflict escalates to new fronts, there's no signs of things ending in Gaza. Mona Abuamara is the chief representative of the Palestinian General Delegation to Canada, and she joins me now. Mona Abuamara, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I wonder if we could start at the same place where I did with the Israeli ambassador. What are your thoughts 1 year into this latest cycle of violence?
So last year when I started getting all these hills of interviews, and every time in my interviews or any other Palestinian activist or a leader of organization that is pro-Palestinian, anytime they would speak about history and how we came to this falling into this abyss of darkness, we would all be asked to just like, we know the history, but we need to start there. So I want to try this today, if you would allow me, with you, and tell you that we've been here for a year that had tens of thousands of Palestinians slaughtered, a year where we have still tens of thousands under the rubble just because they're Palestinian, because had there been any other nationality, Canada would be the first, along with all the other liberal democracies and other countries in the free world, to get them out. We would also not see these thousands of prisoners that are being mistreated, tortured, raped inside the prisons. So if I come and tell you today, after starvation was used as a weapon, after 29,000 orphans have lost their parents, please start on October 8th. Don't talk to me about anything that has a history, because nothing justifies everything that's happened and still happening. Nothing justifies the first and only live-streamed genocide that has been going on for 365 days and counting. So if you aren't able to do so, you shouldn't be able to tell me to start on October 7th. We need to go back to the root cause and treat the disease, not the symptoms. We need to end this genocide, to end the occupation and apartheid. This is the only way forward.
So how do we get to that point? I mean, the toll of this year has been enormous, right? 42,000 in Gaza alone. It's moved now into other countries in Lebanon, and you know, missiles are still firing in both directions. How do you get to a point where just in Gaza it can stop? If Hamas is not willing to give up its hostages and Israel is not willing to stop until Hamas is gone or the hostages are released, how do you even reconcile this?
So first and foremost, Netanyahu needs to want to end this, because since the beginning, it was a green light that was given to Netanyahu by the free world, by the liberal democracies, to take revenge on defenseless Palestinians, on 2.3 million, 1 million of them children. And since day one, we've been saying this is not a war on Hamas. This is a war on the Palestinian people, and Netanyahu wants to prolong it as much as he can. And that's not the Palestinian view. It's the Israeli view. It's the international organizations' view, the UN. a lot of people have come up and said that this is for personal matters of Netanyahu. So
to prolong his government, to keep his coalition alive.
And to keep himself from facing court.
Right, because he faces possible corruption prosecution once he is no longer prime minister of Israel.
Exactly. So every time we were close to a deal, or with Hamas and then with Hezbollah, with all the conversations about ending this and getting the hostages out, even the parents of the hostages now tell you that it's not the priority of Benjamin Netanyahu to get the hostages out. He wants to continue this war, which is occupying Gaza once again on foot, because they never left. Just like the occupation ambassador just mentioned, Israel has controlled Gaza even after the 2005 withdrawal, controlled air, everything that comes through the borders, the water, everything, what is allowed and not allowed. And funny enough, the things that weren't allowed included toys, pasta, A4 papers. So it was, calories were counted. So no, it's a decision that the Israeli government needs to take, especially Netanyahu, to end this.
Well, certainly this current prime minister and his current coalition with the Hamas must be eradicated, all the hostages must be released, and the rejection of the two-state solution makes a difficult set of circumstances, right, to find an end to this particular conflict as it's going right now. I mean, what do you see an endpoint looking like? Is there a way, after all of this and what you've described and what we've seen with our own eyes has happened in Gaza, how do you coexist when this round of fighting ends?
So for us, as a Palestinian people and leadership, what we are doing is moving forward, knocking every single door of every international organization. We're resisting the status quo that Israel wants to put us in. We're resisting the inevitable just oppression and occupation that goes into perpetuity, because we will not be anyone's perfect victim and die in silence. Israel is calling that diplomatic terrorism, and that speaks volumes about the definition of that word as well that Israel has been using and misusing to just protect its occupation and apartheid intact. We have gone to the UN General Assembly, to the Security Council, and we are being prevented from our legitimate path towards recognition of Palestine on the ground and in paper. So,
do you think support for the two-state solution and for the official recognition of a Palestinian state, because the countries, Canada being one of them, have inched closer to that position, but not yet gone all the way. Do you think support for that has strengthened over the past year? Do you think people are much closer to it? Like, when do you think you might see some of these big Western countries actually make that formal recognition?
Yeah, so I think that the time is now. Canada has moved, of course, changed its policy on the recognition from keeping it till the end of a two-state negotiated peaceful agreement.
Before the peace process is over.
You can't actually have a peaceful discussion with someone who says they will never accept you being as a nation with statehood, with sovereignty, with freedoms. So that made Canada and others change its policy on the recognition. They're looking for the right time. We say the right time is now. And now when we moved and we had our first resolution in the United Nations General Assembly and to vote on the ICJ rulings and on the proposal of also getting a full membership in the UN and sending that to the UN Security Council, Canada, in this resolution on the ICJ advisory opinion, abstained, but 124 countries were in favor. And at this point, it's a responsibility for Canada as well to not inch, stride, because it's now its legal responsibility by international law that it's championing for.
One of the challenges, as you know, that should there be a peace and a recognition of a state, and then the day after, who governs in the Palestinian states. And there is an insistence in a lot of places that Hamas not be part of it. And I just wonder your analysis as someone who's not associated with Hamas, but obviously is part of the Palestinian government. They've been degraded militarily. Politically, though, is Hamas stronger or weaker than it was a year ago after everything we've seen?
Well, you know, it's an ideology, and it feeds on the injustice that happens, and it feeds for people to just say that since diplomatic means have not gotten us anywhere, we would take things into our hands, and that was partially due to the impunity, the utter and total impunity that was given by the free world to Israel to do any atrocity it believes it can, which brought us to total genocide with everybody watching. But also, at this point, we can't tell our people with all honesty that this is the only way, because they come and say, but that didn't get us anywhere, and Israel refuses to move forward. So we take things into our own hands and try to get freedom that way. Those kids who are orphaned now would be just set to the back of a wall and not find anything else to do. That's where these types of ideologies grow. And the way to end any armed use is not by more oppression. It's by presenting to people a path to peace. It's by showing people that their lives are not less worthy or valuable than the Israelis. And that was something that the Palestinians learned the very, very, very horrific way, especially hard for us coming from Canada.
So, I mean, the slaughter Hamas unleashed with its actions on October 7th, do you think in a perverse way it's made it stronger politically? Because, you know, with every Israeli airstrike and somebody loses a family member or whatever, even if they're targeting the Hamas leadership, as they say, the collateral damage has been wide. And it has been profound. Well, I mean, is this just radicalize a whole new generation of people?
That's just outrageous when the occupation and genocide ambassador just with a straight face said that what they target is Hamas and their families. I have my family murdered, slaughtered in the worst way. So is he accusing also my family of being Hamas or a family, or under his definition, a terrorist that deserves to be slaughtered? No, Israel is not trying to minimize casualties or going on the ground to fight a fight between its soldiers and Hamas. It's the only one that is using human shields, which are all these civilian people who are being slaughtered in order to just show the world that it can. And we need that to end.
The central conundrum I approached with the Israeli ambassador is that, you know, they have the goal of eliminating Hamas, but also freeing the hostages, and they seem to be at odds with each other. But that's the stated position, that they are going to persist with the fighting until they've accomplished one or the other. Yahya Sinwar and Hamas are not releasing people and agreeing to a ceasefire either, so this cycle looks like it will continue for the foreseeable future. Do you see, just as a final point, an end? Do you see an end point, and what might it look like? Because it's harder and harder to see one right now, it seems.
I want to go back to the cycle for a second, but I want to tell you that yes, an end is by implementing international law equally and not looking at the nationality of the person before saying that they cannot and can do what they do. You can't base a definition of terrorism on some and not the other side after a genocide of this sort. Not calling Israel a terrorist state is a huge problem for the definition, especially for liberal democracies that are trying to send out and champion for values and principles. It's not a cycle, because just like it was with occupation, it's not a cycle. There's an occupier and an occupied. And now, with the deals that are going on, Israel is the one that is not willing to end this and have a deal with anybody because it wants to continue its force, and there's not going to be a military or a security solution to our struggle. The world needs to understand that only freedom will bring, and justice for the Palestinians will bring peace.
Mona Abuamara, Chief Representative of the Palestinian General Delegation in Canada. I want to thank you for your time again today. Thanks for being here.